If I would, we're about to start. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes, I was just...
A few more people will be drifting in from coffee break, but welcome then to the first session of Theme 2, which is Healthier, Innovative, Capable, and Inclusive Communities. And this morning's panel session, the topic is Nutrition, Women, and Food Systems, a Foundation for Sustainable Development. So I invite Roger Thurow, Senior Fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, who's our moderator for this panel, and invite him to the podium. Thank you all for being here. Roger, welcome.
Thank you, Yasser. We're all live. Excellent. Thumbs up. We hope. We can all project, right? It's a smaller room, so I don't think anybody will have problems with this. Yeah, thanks for coming. Stragglers will come in. Everyone's welcome. Yeah, Yasser just gave us the title, Nutrition, Women, and Food Systems, a Foundation for Sustainable Development. It has a question mark at the end. Hopefully we'll address that question, perhaps come up with the answer of a definitive absolutely. They're the Foundation for Sustainable Development. But what we'll be talking about is but how? What's working? Where are we making progress? Where we found things that haven't worked so well? This whole nexus of agriculture and nutrition, so vital. The gender role, exceedingly important. And then looking across it at the whole value chain, not just the productivity on the farms and the growing of crops, but throughout the whole value chain. And we've got a spectacular panel, really, of people who are on the front lines of this issue and question. They're seeing things in action, putting various aspects into play. And we'll just start an introduction on that end. Douglas Brown, Director, Agriculture and Food Security at World Vision International. I'm actually tomorrow going to be on my way to Uganda, where I'll be with some World Vision programs on the ground on the Harvest Plus biofortification aspect. Howdy, the Meister of all of that, is in the audience as well, so we can have a great discussion on this. Maria Semedo, Deputy Director General, Coordinator of Natural Resources at FAO.
No problem.
That's okay. It's another earring, right? That's Tjada Mckenna, Assistant to the Administrator and Deputy Coordinator of Development Assistant to the Administrator of USAID, Deputy Coordinator of Development for the U.S. Feed the Future initiative. That's really widely spread across all these fronts. Shawn Baker, Director of Nutrition at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Kathy Spahn, President and Chief Executive Officer of Helen, Keller International. So, as I said, a really spectacular panel with people that are on the ground, in the field, and are seeing what's happening. I just wanted to start us off, perhaps set the scene a little bit, because hopefully what we'll do is be very anecdotal in our discussion, very tactile in the sense that one can get a feeling and a sense for what's going on the ground and what is working on this front and what we need to do. But just to start off with an anecdote from my reporting of the Last Hunger Season book in Western Kenya. And it was one of the farmers in particular, Sephora Baketi. And when I met her and was having a discussion, their family was already in the midst of the hunger season, this period of profound deprivation when they're starting to ration food. Meals are shrinking from 3 a day to 2 to 1 to none, to maybe a very weak bowl of porridge or a small bowl of porridge in the morning, and that's it, or a very weak cup of tea, probably without sugar. And that's basically it for the day, unless they can scrounge something together. But as we talked, what I saw was kind of the deepest form of misery for her, for so many of the other women farmers, was that to be a mother of to be a mother of a starving or a hungry child and being unable to silence the crying. And from her, I also learned that these women farmers who make up the majority of the farmers, at least in her area in Western Kenya and pretty much throughout Africa and elsewhere in the developing world, particularly with the staple crops, they were feeling that they were failing on two fronts. One is farmers, because they weren't growing enough food to feed their families throughout the year, to have an additional surplus to improve their quality of life and their shambas and their homesteads, but also that they were failing as mothers because they had malnourished children. And so it was kind of the depth of that feeling that she was conveying to me that really had a great impact me, motivates a lot of my reporting. I know motivates a lot what the things that the panelists are involved in. And so ending this misery, this feeling of failure, is indeed vital to fostering sustainable development. Empowering women farmers, all the smallholder farmers in particular, on all fronts, improving nutrition, improving productivity, not just in the field, but throughout the value chain, as I said. So I guess if we can start off with some of the things that you guys are finding on the ground, particularly on the front of empowering smallholder farmers, particularly the women farmers, and how that kind of plays out in the improving, not only in conquering the hunger season, but in improving nutrition. So, Catherine, you want to start with you?
I'm happy to start, and I'm going to start by talking about some of the mistakes we've made and the lessons we've learned. We've been working in homestead food production, women-led backyard gardens, and small animal husbandry for about 25 years. And we incorporate in those programs training on essential nutrition actions and income generation activities. And what we found is we haven't achieved the success we've wanted because we've been very traditional. We have been gender focused. We've provided inputs to women, we've provided training to women, but we failed in that we haven't included the men, and we haven't tried to get at the root gender biases that are keeping women from having the decision-making authority and from being able to care appropriately and provide nutrition to their children. So what we're focusing on now, if you will, is going from being gender-focused to gender transformative, having participatory discussions with the women, with the men, with the mothers-in-law, to really unearth what are those biases, they may be invisible biases, that are informing decision-making and choices in the household. And if I may, I'll give a very quick example. We have recently added fish farming to our programs, both in Cambodia and in Bangladesh. And what we found is even though we provided the fingerlings to the women and the training about how to care for the fish ponds, the men have the authority. So the men made the decision that they wanted the larger fish because they're large and they can sell them, whereas the women, we really wanted to steer them toward the smaller, very nutrient-dense fish that grow much more quickly so the mother would have food to feed her family and her children. But the men ruled out and got to have the larger fish, which is why we now know we really need to include the men from the beginning and discuss the whole thing and unearth behavior patterns.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really important because it was also Sephora in a conversation I had with her, and she said that as particularly the maize crop, she was doubling, tripling, quadrupling production of that. And one time, actually, one season had a tenfold increase in production. The more interested than her husband, who's basically an animal trader and trying to deal with more kind of a cash crops, that he got interested in the staple crops. And she said that was really good because that's the way it should work. That husbands and wives should be together on the decision-making in the family, on the whole range of front, not only what they were feeding, but then the nutritious value of it, the meal preparation, and things. So I like that, gender transformation. Shawn.
Yeah, I tend to be somebody who's optimistic and sometimes characterized as pathologically optimistic, but I was racking my brain when I looked at what have we done well in terms of, well, particularly women's nutrition. And this is also linked to what we're doing internally at the Gates Foundation right now in terms of revising our strategy and looking across what other strategies in nutrition are doing. And I think we could probably conclusively say in terms of women's nutrition, we've just failed. And we've just failed miserably. And one indicator of that, if you would take iron folic acid supplementation as an example, which is one of the nutrition interventions that's been on the books longer than most of us have been alive, our coverage is abysmal and our compliance is even worse than that. And you see enormous opportunity is missed because often you'll see increased access to prenatal services, but in fact even with that increased access to prenatal services, we're not even doing that nutrition intervention for women, let alone anything else of meaning. And so I think we as a nutrition community, I think often not just nutrition, but the development community have certainly better understood the primacy of the 1,000 days from conception through the first 2 years as fundamental to the future of children and adults. But in fact, we've lopped off the first 270 days. So saying 730 days doesn't really have the same resonance. So we say 1,000 days, but we've in fact missed a huge chunk of that 1,000 days. Now, why do I, and then when you talk about, well, wouldn't it be good to even get women before they get pregnant and actually be considerate about women's nutrition as its own good, we do even worse because at least the health system theoretically has platforms to get to women once they get pregnant, even though we do it very late in the pregnancy. The other, we don't really have, if a woman's not pregnant and doesn't have a young child, we really don't care about her. Mm-hmm. So why do I do that? Because I think it's very relevant here that, so one of the questions is this a foundation of sustainable development? I think the evidence is very clear it is, but it's a foundation in which we do not invest at all. But I would posit that agriculture-based, food system-based interventions probably have a real comparative advantage of reaching these groups for their own good and for the good of their offspring. And just a couple of examples of that, certainly large-scale food fortification and universal salt iodization, which are part of the food system, are some of the few nutrition interventions that actually are effectively reaching women of reproductive age, both pre-conception and during conception. And I'm sure there are others on the panel who might speak of biofortification, but those programs, some of them being scaled up like orange plus sweet potato, are certainly reaching them. And if you have programs that are focused on smallholder women farmers, there's a compelling evidence that that will actually increase nutrition. So I think that there's a particular value for these sorts of approaches reaching women.
Thank you, Shawn. Tjada, are you also finding that compelling evidence that Shawn just mentioned in the Feed the Future?
Yes, so Feed the Future from the beginning has had, the two top line goals were hunger alleviation, so real poverty goal, as well as undernutrition. And then gender was an element that was meant to be woven throughout our interventions. And we've learned a lot, but I think we're still constantly discovering what we don't know as well. So on the nutrition side, I think that was a message, bringing the nutrition and ag communities together. I think in the last few years we've made tremendous strides in that. Like as Shawn was saying, everyone can talk to you about the first 1,000 days. I think we've gotten really smart about working with value chains and thinking, we talk about nutrition sensitive and nutrition specific, and really making sure that we think about nutrition as we promote certain crops. And certainly we have a lot of good agriculture programs that have health and women in nutrition appended on through centers to weigh children and women's education and using women as trainers. So I think we've gotten to the first step of making people aware and doing nutrition activities. On the gender side, I think where we still have to work is really thinking of it in a comprehensive way and making sure that what you measure doesn't put things in little ghettos or silos. So, for instance, we measure women and how much we're attacking women in our programs and the percentage of women. So sometimes in our value chain programs, I'll see that people will do specific women-designed activities, or they will go after women-headed households, as opposed to really thinking comprehensively about women in dual households. Or thinking about women, it's easier to talk to women as micro enterprises, or to just do a nutrition intervention on top of your ag and count that I've got in women, as opposed to working with women on the production side, or making sure that women have equal access to finance or to the market side. So I think what we measure, we have to be careful that we still are supporting very integrated, comprehensive approaches to women and to nutrition, and not just promoting siloed activities that we know that work, but that don't pull it all together. So I think we've learned a lot. We've gotten far in those very intervention-specific activities. USAID has a new multi-sectoral nutrition strategy that really weaves our work in Feed the Future with our global health strategy, with other things. And on gender, we're measuring it. But I think it's just highlighted how much more we have to do, and to make sure that they're not check-the-box exercises, but that this is a really comprehensive approach.
Thank you, Tjada. And we'll explore specifics of what everybody is raising, fascinating aspects of what needs to be done, and new frontiers that we need to push on all this. Maria, this also being the UN's year of the International Year of Family Farmers. Exactly. So this is right in the wheelhouse of that.
Yeah, but first, thank you for inviting FAO and inviting me to be part of this panel. Before replying to your question, let me contextualize why we consider in FAO that this nexus or this linkage, agriculture, women, and nutrition is important. If you look at the world, how is a composed world? 50% of the population is women, and we are mothers of the other half. This means that as mothers of the other half, we need to take care of their nutrition, because we become pregnant, we have to take care of our nutrition, we have to breastfeed is nutrition sensitive, and after we have to grow up our kids, and we take care of the nutrition of the family. On the other half, as being women and producers, we see that especially in developing countries, 43% of the labor force in agriculture is women. This means that economically, socially, it makes sense to have this linkage, agriculture, women, and nutrition. But the problem, and on the other side, maybe in 2010, we did our SOFI, the State of Food Insecurity, regarding gender, and it was proven that if women and men, they have the same access to education, to input, to technology, we can remove under malnutrition 100 million people. If you see that today we have 800 million, if we can remove 100 million from these figures, women will have a very important role. But why? What is not giving women the possibility to be fully producers, to be fully exercising this opportunity? Because if you see, we don't have access. The woman doesn't have access to land, not having access to land, we don't have access to inputs, we cannot access to credit, we cannot access to good seeds, we cannot access to knowledge, education, so on and so forth. I think the first thing to do is really how we can have this equality in access to inputs to produce. But looking at nutrition is not only to produce, as it has been said here, we need to produce nutritious food. We need to produce food who will contribute to the a good health of our kids and of our family, not speak only the kids, but the entire family. And this is what we have to give education, knowing what are those nutritious food. And I maybe give you an example. We had an example in Chad where the men, they left the community because they didn't have a good rainy season, and they left work outside. And they left the women taking care of the family. And what FAO did, we worked with the women in this community. We helped them negotiating with the community, the elders, to have access to the land. After we gave access to them to the inputs, we gave training on good agricultural practices, and they carried out economic activities which can give some income, and they could invest in the family. And when we finished the project, the analysis shown that in their community, 50% of the beneficial households, they were no longer suffering of malnutrition. They had incomes. They sent their kids to the school. They had education, and the health has improved. And the same figures show that the malnutrition dropped 12.6%, and when we went to the non-beneficiaries, the rate was 40%. And we see that when you have tailored actions, we can really help and improve not only the nutrition at the household, the beneficiaries, but we can improve incomes, giving the possibility for education, good health, and developing of the community.
Thank you. Douglas Brown from World Vision. So Shawn was talking about the failure in terms of women's nutrition. Also a broad failure on the front of integrating agriculture and nutrition over the last number of decades. And I know you guys have entered into a broad partnership with Harvest Plus and the use of the biofortified crops. I'll be in Uganda. It's the orange flesh sweet potato and the high iron beans, as I said. So what are you kind of seeing from the front edge of this nutrition agriculture merger, or what's being called nutrition smart or nutrition sensitive agriculture, and kind of how that's playing out in the villages and the people that you're working with?
Well, I mean, I think the Harvest Plus one with biofortified food crops is a really important thing, because farmers, male or female farmers, need to decide what varieties they're going to grow, and obviously the nutritional value of those crop varieties is very important. And so the idea of, from the biofortification point of view, is why not make those staple food crops, grains and or legumes, tackle some of the other dietary nutritional constraints that people face. And it's a wonderful opportunity, and it works really, really well. And farmers are used to experimenting and planting different varieties of seeds. So how you work that through and helping people identify that and build that capacity is really great. But I think there's some other things that are very important as well along the way. I mean, and that's not going to solve the dietary diversity thing in and of itself, but it's an important contributing factor. But we still can ask the question, what is nutrition sensitive, of course. But I'd like to come back to that later. I think there's other examples that are really important as to what's worked. Investing in leadership, men and women, empowering men and women to do things better themselves, but especially making sure women are not left out of the equation, and that's too easily done in too many places. Since I've been working in agricultural development, since the late 80s, working, understanding the cultural context of where we work, and that includes gender roles for men and women, and the constraints and the challenges that people faces in making decisions and making change. If you don't understand that context, that cultural context, that gender context, roles for men and women, you don't do good development work. It's been understood for a long time, but it's hard. It's not well done too many times. And same thing with nutrition. Unless we understand the decisions that people make around dietary choice and the things that constrain and limit their choices, and your work with the last hunger season just highlights that, these tragic choices that people have to make. you double somebody's income, but if doubling their income still only puts them at 50% of the poverty line, they're going to have to choose between school or medical care or dietary adequacy. They shouldn't have to choose between those. And if we don't understand, when we see poor dietary choices, we need to know whether or not they're because of differing roles and responsibilities between men and women in making decisions, whether there's other things that are competing for those limited resources, or whether it's knowledge about what to do and how to feed your children. It could be any one of those. And if any one of those isn't there, we're not going to see good nutrition outcomes. So, but coming back to what does work, investing in leadership, empowering women and families and households to make better decisions, things like positive deviance hearth approaches, which look at those people who are doing well in a context and helping them help others to figure out how they can do better. Savings groups build social capital. They build community sense. They empower people to take charge of their lives. And primarily women are involved in those. It's women who really catch on to the savings group idea. Working at value chains. Even something as simple as conservation agriculture can have a tremendous effect on women and their ability to provide for their children, to work with their husbands too. And I think we can do a lot around our language, around nutrition and sensitivity and gender sensitivity in our work too, because we often talk about how the majority of food insecure people are women and children. But if we look at the population in general, on average, half of the people are men and half are women. In some places, half of the people are children, and half of the people are adults. So right away, if it's 50-50 split both ways, 75% of the people are women and children. On the other hand, 75% of the people are men and children. So when we talk about these numbers, that the majority of food insecure are women and children, we need to get beyond that and understand what do we really mean by those things. We know that we need to make sure that people aren't left behind, that these relative differences are dealt with. I saw a figure in a project proposal the other day which said, on average, households have 5 food insecure months a year. And they said female-headed households are food insecure for at least 1 month more than that, so 6 months. So 6 months is terrible, but 5 months is not good. So, we need to think about those kinds of things in that sort of a context, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, that again, when you're with the families during the hunger season, you're right, it's not just, it's everybody in the family, and it's usually not just one family, but it's the entire community or village area that's going through that. So it goes across, certainly engulfs the whole family. And kind of talking about that in terms of the pervasiveness of something like that of the hunger season, the lack of food, in terms of the caloric intake, but then just the nutritional intake as well. To talk about kind of the all-inclusiveness in the programming that needs to go on, and kind of the multi-sectoral nature of the work that everybody here is involved with. I mean, Tjada talked about not putting things in silos, and people working on, okay, this is our pet project, and this is what we do, and hopefully do well, but we're not going to be concerned with other things. But improving nutrition, I'm finding, you have to deal with all the other sectors. That you can't really pick and choose or leave something out. Kathy, is that what?
Absolutely, and I think the challenge is to find the balance between what you as one intervener, as one organization, take on and integrate on your platform, and what others do that you tie in. Because you can't have success without WASH. You need water, you need sanitation, you need hygiene, but does that mean your organization does it, or that you co-locate with other players? And I think you don't want to spread too thin. And I know in the world of vitamin A supplementation and distribution of ivermectin to prevent river blindness, studies have been done by WHO that say that the community health volunteers, who are often the backbone of this work, can take on 4, maybe 5 interventions that they can wrap their minds around and do the training, do the education. So I think we all have to be careful not to overburden. All those components have to be part I believe, of the solution, but you have to decide what you take on and what you
Right.
co-locate with.
Because I've seen some programs that are with the vitamin A distribution, and they twin that with then the deworming programs. If they're both on the schedule of twice a year, you can do them both together because I deal with all this from just a journalistic or a layperson's perspective, but kind of fascinated by the science of all this, that it's great to get the nutrients in the body, but they have to stay there. So that's why the water sanitation hygiene is so important with the diarrhea and dysentery. Everything will wash out. But then also the sanitation and the environmental component to knock back the worms and the parasites. I didn't realize there was a specific worm or parasite that kind of consumes the vitamin A that's in the system. And so, yeah, let's, vitamin A distribution and knock out the worms at the same time. So we're at the stage that anybody at the panel can jump in at any time. Any thoughts that you have, just start speaking. Raise your hand, whatever. So anything else on the multi-sectoral fund? I also wanted to get into, have raised a couple of times the 1,000 days focus, and that focusing, and does that become kind of a new organizing principle that recognizes all these things have to come together across sectors, but then also particularly for this time period. But then, as Shawn was saying, that the nutritional aspects have to have a whole life cycle component. That it's also the shape and the condition and the nutritional health that the women are as they approach the childbearing years. So anybody.
And I know I don't want to hog the platform, but I can hear my staff screaming, nutrition programs can't consider woman as only a vessel, for the child. And Shawn was referencing that a bit in what he was talking about. It's not just pregnant women who should be a focus. But I'll stop there.
I wanted to build on one of the points Kathy had raised about the multi-sectoral nature and finding the right balance. And I think this is where, to me, the word integration becomes very dangerous because it means all things to all people. Are we talking about that frontline worker is going to have to deliver everything from agricultural expertise to sanitation expertise to vitamin A capsules? I think that's probably not possible. And so to really think more of, with given contact points, what can frontline workers do? Be they from the health sector, the ag sector, other sectors. But then also, I think where multi-sectoral approaches for nutrition really fail is that we're really not crisp what we're asking of the other sectors. It's like, go do something nutrition sensitive. Well, does that mean I just wear a nice little nutrition badge on my sleeve?
Right.
Yeah. And I think particularly for us in nutrition have dealt a lot with the ag sector. In a way, we've won the advocacy war, and then we sort of are having our bluff called by ag ministers because they're like, okay, well, concretely, what do you want us to do? And that's where you need to get extremely specific in your sensitivity to say, actually, these are the concrete actions. And I think another point I wanted to make about where I think particularly when you're talking about agriculture, food systems, nutrition, and how we all talk together, I find we actually don't have a common language because at the end of the day, we don't even have good data on what people are eating. And that's where it all does come together. And until we really need to be able to get more robust data on a routine basis on consumption so we can understand how do you plan your nutrition policies so they're evidence-based, what do you want your you're producing stuff in agriculture, but is actually ending up in people's bellies, and if not, then what adjustments do we make? What adjustments do you need to make your food system beyond the agricultural system? Because we often have these discussions in sort of an evidence vacuum, and I think that's someplace we really need to make a breakthrough so these sectors can speak together.
Great. Jada.
Shawn's comments come back to, I think Doug was absolutely spot on in terms of talking about the importance of cultural context and you bringing it together with the importance of data and really understanding what people are eating and Like I think we've all seen it with orange flesh sweet potatoes. Like if there are some magic things out there that you want to promote, but if communities aren't used to eating them, if there are other things that are going on, you're still not going to, it comes down to behavior change and people, what they eat, how they choose to eat, how they choose to feed their families are just intensely personal, cultural things. One of the tools that we've developed that we're really proud of and are still learning, surprised by the learnings from and are adapting, is a Women's Empowerment and Agriculture Index along with IFPRI and the Oxford Poverty Institute. And that really is trying to help us really understand the context in which we're working, because it looks at women's engagement in agriculture specifically along the lines of production, resources, income, leadership, and time use. So how much women have control over their resource or time or labor. And it really, like the findings can surprise you, and I think it also can help us. The stage we are now is we've done baseline surveys for all of the 19 Feed the Future focus countries, and now what we're looking at is how do you adapt your programming. So if in a cultural context the issue really becomes the women's access to decisions over how resources are spent, like what does that mean for how you program and how you make sure that you're addressing that. And I think the next dimension that we have to look at is measuring it over time to make sure that we're not producing unintended consequences. So if we start to address one area, that we haven't caused problems in the household dynamic in other ways. So there's still really understanding that cultural context, working with people that are culturally competent and really knowing that these are kind of a little bit intrusive things that we're promoting, I think will help take us further than we would just thinking about it from an academic perspective.
Doug, or
Go ahead.
Yeah, Maria.
Now,
Doug?
I wanted probably to say that the micro aspect, as we are discussing, is important, but the micro, but you have to see the micro level. When I say the micro level, I am speaking about the decision making, the policy makers, how they should create this enable environment where the culture cannot impede the women or the gender equality, and for this leadership, this empowerment, and really assuming the responsibilities. On the other side is the way we see nutrition. Usually when we go at the policy level, nutrition is under health as social policy, but nutrition is cross-cutting, is integrated, as we said. Agriculture should be part, trade should be part, because you need to see the entire value chain. And at this highest level is very important at the policy, the decision making, that we take into consideration the gender equality and the empowerment and this cross-cutting aspect of nutrition.
I'd like to, and it's not unrelated to what Maria and Shawn and Tjada have said, but going back to Kathy's comment about, multi-sectoral sort of interventions, that, we're not all development practitioners on the field or government ministries or whatever can't do everything for everybody all at once. And I think that's a very valid point. And one organization might work on something and another on another in the same place and in the same time. But when you decide that, it's not that integrated approaches are the newest thing and you have to be integrated everywhere and multi-sectoral everywhere. What's needed is to clearly understand what's not working, why it's not working. Because if we look at what people have and what people can do in terms of their livelihoods to provide for their families, and you want to look at the other end of it, the other end of the chain is the good nutrition outcomes for children, for women, for men as well. And the reality is that if people aren't doing well in terms of nutrition, they can't work very well either. But if we think of that as a chain, if we've got 3 broken links in that chain, it doesn't matter fixing all of them is necessary for a functioning chain. It's not going to be a functioning chain if I fix any one of them. So it's not a matter of, what's the limiting factor here, like in plant growth. If there's not enough water, the nitrogen doesn't work. But if we have nitrogen, it's not that. It's so quite often one of the broken links is sanitation. Quite often another one might be behaviors and choices around dietary choices. But equally, those limiting broken links could be income. or it could be competing demands on limited income, or another broken link could be just simple peace and security and the freedom to actually cultivate a field. So we need to understand in a context what links are broken and which ones are necessary to actually have a complete chain that functions, between what people can do and what they eat. And that's what programming we need to have. That's what we need to be doing in an area. And it might be policy change, it might be training, it might be helping farmers experiment with new agricultural practices. But they need to all be there at the same time and in the same place to actually have really good lasting progress. And I think that's the challenge about it. The other related one is, what do we mean by nutrition sensitive? A backyard garden with a high diversity of foods in that is great, but if that's not changing the diet of the family, can you really argue that it's nutrition sensitive? On the other hand, a coffee grower who manages to work in a marketing association and doubles their coffee production income, and that translated into changed diet, well, maybe that is nutrition sensitive. I think of the story of talking with a farmer in India, and they cultivated an area that was flooded fairly regularly, and World Vision helped them with some game beans to build a barricade. And they built the barricade so that it wasn't flooded every rainy season. And all of a sudden, they weren't in debt to the moneylenders anymore. And the guy went on to say, so now my kids are in school, now we eat better, and now we have savings. And I sleep better at night because I'm not worried about what.
Right.
Now, in that case, they knew what to do about diet. They wanted to get their kids in school. And there were some other things that were there that weren't broken, but that one was really badly broken. And all the nutrition education in the world would not have changed the fact that the person couldn't feed their children the way they wanted to. So I think that's where we need to understand the diagnostic and how to get there.
Yeah, absolutely, and great points made across the board. I guess I wanted to pick up something that I've also heard about everybody kind of also talking about behavior change, both for the organizations and what you're learning on the ground and the people that you're working with. But in terms of, say, the policymakers and decision makers, and Shawn, I think you were talking about, is how, the questions that they're asking you about, okay, so you're telling us all this stuff, we need to do all these things. What do you tell them? And how do you get going? I mean, Tjada, you're nodding your head. I mean, that's the realm that you're coming from.
Yeah.
And so, be it, members in Congress or people in the administration or something, or the other governments that you're partnering with in Feed the Future, what do you tell them, and how do you move the policymakers and decision makers that are so important?
So one of the reasons I was nodding and laughing, and I think someone else said it earlier, sometimes in the early days, I feared that the nutrition advocacy kind of was outrunning kind of the concrete things we knew to tell people. And I think we know a lot more. And some certain things, someone said earlier, certain things we've known they're the right things to do for a long time. So how do you get them? But it is, even within our own government, nutrition, it was very siloed. And it's taken us a few years of Feed the Future up and running to really see that we needed a multi-sectoral strategy and that we needed to consciously break down the barriers. So we chose an agency lead within USAID for nutrition that was not in the Global Health Bureau. So that was step one. So the agency lead for nutrition happens to now sit in the Bureau for Food Security. But, it's something that involves the WASH team that's in another bureau that we have, E3. The Global Health has a whole nutrition team, right, that is focused on these things, and really making sure that we had one set of goals that we could say, okay, as an agency, this is where we're going to go, and this is how we are going to collaborate in a concrete way together to make sure that our things are coordinated and that we are hitting these things. So we were out there talking to governments about join SUN, set a target, do this, without even knowing all the steps we needed to do to get our own house in order as the donor. So I think we are all learning from each other as we go along. But the message is certainly there, and so I think there's a lot of will there, and it's really helping people to really see what's working and what isn't, so that they can scale it up quickly, and to also learn what isn't working and not. And just to add one other thing that's been, the nutrition-sensitive bucket is a sensitive issue because it can be all things to all people, and it can be a check off the box. And so I think that's where getting to the data of what really works and the things that are really making an impact, so that it doesn't become easy for people to think they're doing something but that really aren't having impact.
What we didn't mention yet, and I consider it's very important, is research and innovation. And I think if we really improve research, where we can bring innovation to agriculture and putting women at the center, we can really say and define what is nutrition sensitive. And we can have a research based on this. And another point is partnership. Nutrition is not only responsibility of the government, is government, civil society, private sector, and the families. And we need to see in this global approach. And probably I can say here that FAO and WHO, we are organizing in November a big conference on nutrition. And the idea is put all the stakeholders together and having this global multi-sector approach on nutrition. And we consider this is the right way to see nutrition in a more global fashion, as I can say.
Shawn, were you?
Yeah, I had a couple of points. One follow-on, and thank you for raising that, because I do think that, I mean, there is an evidence gap. There is, I think, there's a robust pipeline of research going on into nutrition-sensitive, particularly nutrition-sensitive agriculture, and I think our evidence base is growing every day. I do think, though, there is sort of a policy gap on what I would call normative guidance on what is nutrition-sensitive agriculture. And that really, it's been one of those areas that who owns that at the international level, then who owns that and can translate that. One of the things, it comes actually down to the behavior change of systems. And I think that there's a strong consensus that systems that bring better technologies, better resources to smallholder women farmers are going to be incredibly transformative on many fronts. But if you look at public sector agricultural extension systems, they are absolutely not geared towards delivering services to smallholder women farmers, to smallholder farmers, period, probably. So the health sector, in theory, is geared towards reaching women, reaching kids. Whether it does it well or not is debatable, but at least theoretically it's there, and it's accountable for it. But the ag sector is held accountable for what? Usually how much food, how much staple are we producing at the national level, or how much the cash crop? Well, if you're your frontline agricultural extension worker, you're not necessarily terribly motivated, nor do you have the specific skills to actually provide the right sorts of services to smallholder women farmers. So it's how do you have quite a re-engineering of the system from top to bottom, so the accountabilities throughout and the capacities throughout will reach not just your larger farmers, but also smallholder farmers, and particularly smallholder women farmers. And that's a huge behavior change system, behavior change throughout the system.
But you are an optimist.
I am an optimist.
And does what see that also reflected, say, in the work of the foundation, in terms of, I guess, bringing together the various divisions and branches that are working on programs, and to bring them all together and say, okay, are we working at cross purposes in some areas? How do we pull together? I ask this because of my reporting in the 1,000 Days book that I think we've talked about that or others, that, yeah, there's a coming together on that, and how do we make this all work together?
And yes, within the foundation, I think, as any large organization, there are certain silos, and nutrition, I think, in any setting is the poster child of breaking down silos, because otherwise we can't succeed. So I think on the negative side, it's never really clear who is really responsible for nutrition and who's the steward of it. So it's everybody's everybody's concern and nobody's true responsibility. So that's the negative side. On the positive side, though, that means if you do have good nutrition leadership, you can work through multiple sectors. Nutrition is interesting because unlike something like immunizations or lots of other health interventions, we actually don't have our own standalone delivery platform. So it's in our DNA to be opportunistic. But then we really need to have capacity diffuse throughout multiple sectors to seize those opportunities to be responsive to the needs of women and children, particularly for nutrition.
Opportunistic is good. So we'll take this opportunity to kind of open it up to others that you guys...
One of the, I'm in Kennedy Tufts University. One of the themes that has...
Great nutrition guru, so...
Is this on?
I think so.
Okay. One of the themes that in various ways has come through this panel discussion is the renewed interest, I'm not sure it's new, but renewed interest in nutrition-sensitive development, multi-sectoral approaches to nutrition. Shawn, I agree with your comment that a lot of the work on this is really revolved around nutrition agriculture. As I travel around, I find an enormous confusion about nutrition-sensitive development, and I'm regularly asked, beyond agriculture, if you get into education, finance, social protection, not just theory, but are there concrete examples, implementation, execution of what nutrition-sensitive beyond agriculture means? And do we know what governance structures seem to facilitate more effective multi-sectoral approach to nutrition?
Yeah, thanks. Particularly the search for the government structure that facilitates this. Anybody? Thoughts?
I think regarding probably what you refer to social protection, we have the examples of Brazil, where they developed a strong program on social protection, giving resources to the family, and they could buy all the food they need. The problem is to have such high social protection oriented program, we need resources. It's very costly. And who will finance? Are the council?
FAO.
Now, only to tell you that in FAO now, if you see the department in charge of nutrition is social protection, gender, and nutrition. They are all together because we consider we need to have this approach. And we don't have, the only example coming to me now is the example of Brazil, but I'm sure we have more where we can show outside agriculture. And my boss is very keen on me. That's why.
I sort of hesitate to say something about this because there happens to be a guru of nutrition-sensitive everything in the room. But if I would, but I think to me, having read that guru's work as well as other people's work on these issues, what my take-home message is that, you know, to be nutrition-sensitive, you have to be very purposeful. You have to, from the get-go, design your program to understand how can this lead to a better nutrition outcome and build that into it. It might be in an indirect way, it might be layering on nutrition-specific interventions like the age of change communication onto it. But that you don't just tag on an indicator, we're going to do the same old thing we've done for the last 20 years and tack a stunting indicator on and then pray that this black box will translate into an impact. So you really need to unpack it. How will this lead to this nutrition outcome? Be very purposeful in your design and your monitoring of it, and be willing to say, you know, we don't know all the answers, but we're going to at least have a robust enough monitoring system that if we see things are not working, we'll course correct. So I do think there indeed are examples out there. There are also a lot of examples of where they failed, and I think usually when they failed, it's actually been very upfront. The fundamental design has not been there to produce that result. I think the governance structure remains a huge unknown. And I think if you go back, to the 80s and 90s, there was sort of a wave of we want to do these big multisectoral approaches that didn't necessarily get off the ground. I do think one thing you want to avoid, and I've seen this in some countries, is creating some sort of a coordination mechanism that disempowers your line ministries. It's because I've seen that in other countries, that it'll become almost a parallel structure which can become very disempowering for line ministries instead of holding line ministries more accountable for specific things they can do. But it also needs to be at a high enough political level then that you can actually have some accountability mechanism built in.
And some force and purpose behind
My
it.
colleague left here.
Exactly.
I think that, I think there's a really good logical connection between agriculture and nutrition because we're growing food, and obviously food is important for nutrition. So, I mean, it's a good place to start, and there's no reason, but it's a good question too because, other forms of income-generating activities are important and can impact nutrition as well. And also the other thing is that there's competing demands on agriculture because agriculture is an economic activity, and people always sell some of it to meet other economic needs in the household, which are some are legitimate needs, and some of them are poor decisions about spending. I mean, that's always the way it is. So I think there's that there. But I think also in terms of, are we seeing results from whether it's agriculture programming or economic development programming or sanitation programming on nutrition? I think it partly also comes back to, are we actually designing our research, social science research questions to actually answer that? We talk about agriculture programs. We don't know whether they have a positive impact on nutrition, but sometimes we just don't measure it to know. That doesn't mean it doesn't have a positive impact, but we just haven't asked the question right. I think of a really good study that was done in Bangladesh on an integrated project that had livelihood and empowerment dimensions to it, and it had direct nutrition and health interventions to it. And what they found in that study, this was in World Development in 2013, I think, Smith et al. And they found that, the nutrition and health interventions on the road had a positive impact on nutrition. The livelihood empowerment things did too. Mm-hmm. But the areas where they were engaged together, working together, actually had a multiplier effect that the result was even better than either one individually. And I think that's the lesson. If we do the research design in terms of studying the question appropriately, we can get that out. And it's not randomized controlled trials that we need. It's good econometric analysis to look at what are the impact pathways and then being prepared to study them and ask those questions. I mean, I've looked at a project baseline database that had a nutrition variable in it and had some information about demographics and participation in previous projects, in this case, savings groups and sanitation project. And looking at them from the sanitation point of view, nutrition was better for those who were involved in sanitation stuff. Looking from the economic development point of view, those in savings groups, their nutrition was better. Which was it? Well, we know that it's probably both, but if we do a better economic analysis or econometric analysis of that, we can tease out and say, what's explaining the larger portion of that variation in nutrition outcome, and answer that question in a legitimate way.
We've got people jumping out of their seats. So the gentleman back there, Ruth.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right there.
Ruth jumps better than anybody. So.
That's because you are sitting down.
Now I'm going to stand up so I
Yeah.
can see. Right. I'm looking.
Very interesting discussion. I'm a grandmother now, and I've been with this nutrition thing ever since I gave birth to my baby. And I know still that breastfeeding is the best. It hasn't changed, by the way. It hasn't changed. Very interesting discussion. And I think at the moment, do we want to change to improve people's nutrition and wellness or not? And if we do, we cannot go back to the way I was learning nutrition a long time ago. I'm happy all of a sudden there's a lot of interest in nutrition, all of a sudden. But we have not invested in training nutritionists. We have not invested in getting people to think of nutrition differently. And the newcomers on board are taking us back where we were, which didn't work. We still have a lot of malnourished people. We have failed. So please, let's get from statistics and what project worked where and see what is it we have now that we can run with to make people better nourished. I'm so sick that I'm going to die still seeing malnourished African children on TV screens, Roger talking about them, making me cry. It's just not right. So I think we need to be practical. So as we talk of behavior change at the mother level, at the consumer level, let's talk of behavior change at our level so that we do things differently. Because we can solve this problem. But we are talking in abstract terms. I'm sorry, I'm a grandmother, sorry.
Yeah, but the wisdom of Ruth and yeah, all the work that you've done on educating people or raising the clamor on the nutrition front. We've talked so often about this and just the shameful and the cruel irony that the hungriest people in the world, particularly the hungriest people in Africa, are smallholder farmers. And the absurdity and obscenity and shamefulness of that oxymoron. And that's, I think, what we're all coming together for, and why you guys wanted to have this panel, is basically to banish that oxymoron. And it's in that cruel irony where this nutrition and agriculture nexus comes together, that the very people who get up every morning to raise their crops, and they see them right out. They take a step outside of their houses, and there the crops are growing. It is their kids who are the most malnourished, and it's an absurdity and an obscenity. So who else? Yep, over there, and then yep, you sir. You're on my next panel.
Yes.
Very good. So I learned something. Thank you.
So actually, someone did mention some years ago we were vague and we didn't really have clear suggestions for ministers of agriculture. So I'd like to put to the panel, everyone, and recognizing that the situation will differ in every country, in every locality, but what would you suggest to the ministers of agriculture that they should do to address the issues, and also, particularly given who is at this meeting, to research centers in universities and elsewhere that are doing agricultural research?
Yeah, great question. So any kind of concrete or specific things that you're engaging with ag ministers or other people in governments about this issue? I don't know, Tjada, you're...
We work in FAO very close. We host GFAR. They are doing a lot of research and innovation in agriculture. If you allow me, we can ask them to tell us what they are doing.
Sure. Is that you? Yep. Was also one jumping out of the seat. So between you and Ruth, I didn't know who was jumping higher, but she was quickest to the microphone.
First of all, it's a woman, so I had to give precedence to Ruth. And Ruth is also happened to be the co-chair of the Global Forum on Research, so it was normal for her to speak. We in GFAR, as Maria Elena said, we are hosted by FAO, so it will not surprise you that we are fundamentally supportive of this linkage between gender and nutrition. And in this regard, I have a little semantic problem, because the CGIAR, for instance, has engaged in a strong gender strategy. And one of the problems we have is that we have to measure impact, to measure to what extent the new CGIAR research program will be really gender compliant. And we have this discussion about what are the indicators that we're going to use. And I'm afraid that we are having the same problem with nutrition. We came up with these gender sensitive programs. But it's not only gender sensitivity that we're about. If we talk about action, you have to measure. So it's gender responsive. It's not gender sensitive. So in nutrition, it should be the same thing. We should have two indicators. One about what our interventions and programs are gender or nutrition sensitive, but they have also to be gender and nutrition responsive. So the problem we're going to have in the next years, I think, but this is something that the ICN2 will also address, is how we're going to have strong metrics to measure nutrition impact. That's very, very important issues for us in GFAR and, of course, in FAO and ICN too.
Thank you. Any thoughts? Any
I'd just
comments
jump in
on that,
and
please.
say that one of the biggest evidence gaps that we face, and we've certainly been partnering with Marie Ruel and IFPRI trying to tackle this, is the impact of programs that are at the intersection of agriculture and nutrition with essential nutrition actions. What is the impact on stunting? I've gone to many donors who have big coffers, lots of dollars, and they say, where's the proof? Where's the proof that this works on child growth? And I think that's a huge priority for research.
Tjada, did you have any thoughts on the previous question about kind of what do you tell?
Yeah, one of them is just really I think there are three things that came to mind on the previous question. One of them was starting with the basics that income gains do not equal nutrition gains. And really, because the ag ministers measured it, someone else said exactly on their export crops and production. And so really making sure that the second one is to make some targets and really measure them if it's around making sure that your goals and what you're promoting include things that people are eating and behavioral change to get people eating them. And the third is really to collaborate heavily with the other ministries to make it work. But the most important part of that really is to get them to set targets and goals and to think through how those come together, because it isn't necessary. It's not a natural. Sometimes the metrics don't lead you to the things that are optimal for nutrition.
Right. And are they not seeing those things themselves? So I'm thinking of, say, Guatemala, where it's just so stark,
right,
of the abundance and just the verdant fields that are there, and the farmers are growing the export crops and the Brussels sprouts and the broccoli that's here in our stores in the U.S., but they have the highest malnutrition rates among the highest in the world.
Right.
And so as they need to make that own connection themselves in those countries.
Yeah, and the ag minister has to feel as much accountable for that as the health minister or the education minister or someone else.
And is it good that they have kind of a bureau, or in Guatemala, this CESAN, that is kind of then, that you need a coordinating bureau that is kind of maybe not above the ministries. This is the problem that Shawn was talking about, that you don't want this parallel structure, but somebody that...
There are pros and cons to the parallel structures, but it's tough when when it's only the responsibility of one ministry. For something as rich as nutrition, I think you do need something that brings people together in a systemic way. And sometimes some heads of state are more than willing to provide that, and you get it all the way from the top. And in that sense, maybe you don't need the coordinating ministry, but sometimes the coordinating ministry can help.
Right. But are there any examples of countries or governments that have done that? Marie, you're talking about Brazil. I mean, they're now kind of off the list of the...
I can give you an example.
Statistics.
Where, in Niger, where I serve, they have this coordination unit. It was at the president's level. The president, he was the one in charge coordinate. You didn't have one minister higher than another. They were equals, and they have to deliver to him. We have this, some they are at the prime minister level, because when they are inter pares, we have always conflicting problem. And I think in Niger it worked quite well. If you see, they have really reduced the level of malnutrition. And another issue, it has been hasn't been mentioned here, is how women should be empowered to be in the decision-making process. We have been usually left, or we are not part at the local level, at the global level, but we need to bring gender parity at the decision level, not to say only women, but gender parity and equity too. And maybe I can say I'm very proud of that. I'm from Cape Verde. Now we have a government with 11 women, 8 men. I think it's the only one in the world.
Well, so that's what I was going to ask. Does that then set that up as kind of an example of, okay, so where is this country then moving on the nutrition and the gender issues, women empowerment front?
Exactly. And this is because the women, they brought their own agenda and they pushed the agenda for equality. And this seems that when women are empowered, they can make change.
Maybe time, well, Shawn, and then we'll have time for one last question. Maybe Howdy then can ask, but Shawn.
Yeah, I wanted to react to a couple of things that were said here. You had asked examples. I think Tanzania is also a very interesting example where it's been presidential leadership, and it really seems to have dramatically improved the coordination. It also has responded to one of the points that Ruth brought up that to me is one of our critical missing elements, which is on-the-ground capacity, because among the presidential commitments has been creating posts of nutritionists in each and every district in the country. And in a way, we get lost sometimes at the national coordination level, but if you can actually get in at the district level where, in fact, things naturally come together, qualified person who has the technical background, but sort of that smoothing capacity, that is really a huge breakthrough in bringing things together. The third point I wanted to make came back to what you said about Guatemala, and I think it is our longstanding problem with nutrition, is that until you see severely wasted kids, it's not visible. So when you have situations at the level of stunting you have in a Guatemala or a Malawi, in fact, that's the norm. That's the norms for the moms, that's the norms for the decision makers, and that's one of our huge, making it visible and making understand that's not the norm. Right. Is important.
Right, and that's what I find in the communities, that when you ask, I mean, is there a problem here? It's like, no. What's the problem? We're all kind of the same. And then it's through the education that Ruth is talking about and other things that, no, it doesn't have to be this way. Howdy. You're the only thing keeping us between us and the lunch break, so.
I'll have to keep it.
But he'll talk. I don't know, sweet potatoes.
I'll try to be long in that case.
High-iron beans that'll give us energy for this afternoon, but that's what we need. But anyway, so Howdy.
Well, I think one of the things that we need to do is try to rely as much as we can on existing behavior. So one of the things that motivates farmers is to raise their incomes. So where we can, we should try to combine higher incomes with better nutrition. So for example, the high iron beans that we're releasing in Rwanda, we're improving yields by 1/2 a ton. Farmers are adopting them because they're higher yielding, not because they're higher in iron. We have a higher yielding pearl millet that's also high in iron. Our high zinc rice in Bangladesh has a growing period of 100 days instead of 120 days, which is a normal growing period. If I see Barbara Wells is here from SIP, if we would only breed orange sweet potato and stop breeding white sweet potato, eventually the orange sweet potatoes would be higher yielding than the white sweet potatoes, and we'd see orange sweet potatoes easily taken up all over the place. So it's that's my plea, is that we look first for ways of improving income and nutrition at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I traveled with Howdy and understood that, I mean, the importance of an economist that's thinking about these issues and, the insights that brings, and kind of then thinking outside of the box, or just breaking down some conventional thinking. And we traveled in Uganda some, and there was there in the villages, just the anecdotes that one hears about, say, the impact of these things, and and Doug, they were in the areas where World Vision is doing some work. Just the anecdotes from the women themselves and the people in the communities are quite powerful. And whether there's the scientific and the medical testing that supports this, but the anecdotes are there, and they talk about a generation of biofortified babies, and so. Anyway, so anything else from anybody on the panel words of wisdom that you wanted to impart that you haven't you've been able to yet, or we'll leave the panel with the final words of somebody, or are we okay? We're all set.
Say that we need a mind change shift on our mindset regarding nutrition, and we need really to change the way we see nutrition.
Right, both the mind shift and the behavior change on all aspects.
Yeah, I just wanted to react to what Howdy said. I mean, I certainly embrace the idea. I mean, I see income as being an incredibly important platform to improve nutrition, and that we really seize that as an opportunity. And I think that's where it's how does income growth, how the way you do it matters as much as how much it is. And I think we also need to flip that argument to make it clear that, to particularly policymakers, that you can turn what's currently a very vicious cycle, because people are undernourished for generations and have less ability to work. You can actually transform that into a virtuous cycle by nutrition itself can actually start breaking the poverty cycle and improve income. So
Exactly.
it can really change that dialogue dramatically. Because I do think sometimes nutritionists have positioned themselves as that, oh, well, we don't really like income or economic growth, and I think we need to break that perception and myth. It's not at all the situation.
Right, exactly. And from the panel early this morning, if anybody was there, and Tjada was also on the panel, and the point there of that these smallholder farmers, they're commercial farmers in a sense. Yes, they may be subsistence farmers. They're trying to grow enough to beat back and conquer the hunger season, but their ambition is the same as farmers anywhere else. So they're entrepreneurs, they're business people. They have that same incentive that if growing the more nutritious crops also leads to better yields, to better income, wow, that's the great incentive to do that as well. And so kind of the comparison that I made there is that they also want to transform their lives from just farming to live to conquer the hunger season, but farming to make a living. And if they can do that, then while also growing the more nutritious crops and bring that all together, that then is something that will lift everybody. We hope so. Thank you. Thanks to the panel. Thanks for your questions and attention. And tell everybody who didn't come to this session what they missed. So.
Sorry, quick announcement on lunch. So lunch announcement. Lunch will be on the 2nd and 4th floor. Right. No one's listening. Lunch is on the 2nd and 4th floor. Please grab your lunch and go to the 3rd floor.